and welcome to the Oregon Business Matters podcast, brought to you by Oregon Business and Industry, where we focus on insights, issues, and initiatives that impact Oregonians' shared prosperity and the state's economic health. I'm Angela Wilhelms, President and CEO of OBI, and your host here at Oregon Business Matters. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Max Forer, a partner with Miller Nash here in Oregon, and someone who at least a portion of his legal portfolio really wasn't even a thing a handful of years ago. Max has become an expert in what is commonly referred to as NIL, or name, image, and likeness. This is the seismic shift in collegiate athletics that bucks the long-standing premise that student athletes are amateurs and shouldn't earn money as a result of their position on a collegiate team. Now, full disclosure, Max and I are both actually former collegiate athletes. We both have a lot of friends and colleagues in this space, so we might be more interested than the average bear, but we've heard from a lot of you that you're interested in this topic, and as college football season heats up, we know you're going to hear a lot about it. So regardless of your team, we know there's widespread interest, and we thought we'd dive in a little bit today. So Max, thank you for joining me, and we can save which team you're going to root for this fall till the end. I don't want to turn off any listeners too soon, but welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Angela. Thrilled to be here and talk about my favorite subject ever, which is NIL and college sports and high school sports.
Yeah, I've got to think this has just become an incredible journey from an intellectual curiosity standpoint, a fascination standpoint. I mean, what a learning curve you've been on.
It's been wild, and as a former athlete, and my wife is a former softball athlete as well, just seeing the change in the opportunities in an industry that didn't have any changes for over 50 years to the changes over the last 4 to 5 years have been just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, well, let's get to it. So we're about to distill what's probably like 2 days worth of material into about a 30-minute primer. So to start, what at the most basic level for our listeners is NIL, and why do we have it now?
Sure. So NIL, otherwise known as name, image, and likeness, is something that has been around forever. It's just really a right of publicity that everyone has. I mean, I have it currently. You have it. Anyone has NIL. It's just your name, image, and likeness, and you can license it and sell it to anyone you want if someone wants a license or sell it or provide money for that. The wrinkle in this is that the NCAA for years, 50 years, has prohibited student athletes from making money off of their name, image, and likeness, and candidly in a lot of other ways. And so what has happened is that NIL has been kind of almost considered as an industry, but really what it's referring to as the seismic shift of college athletes now able to get paid for their name, image, and likeness. And why that is so important is that an athlete, as they rise in their career, their name and their image becomes more valuable the better at their sport they get. And so therefore, their consideration and their profile becomes more valuable as that goes. And so that is where we're really getting into, where there's a lot of opportunities for endorsements and branding with these athletes who are on this national platform playing at their Division I sports. But long story short, NIL has always existed as a right, except for student athletes up until July 1st, 2021.
Yeah, wow. Well, thank you. It's a good clarification. I think now we just kind of colloquially refer to it in the student athlete context, but you're right. It's a good level set to remember. It's not, the premise isn't new. It's the application here that's new. So I want to dive in a little bit because there are multiple paths for students to earn money, and I think sometimes they get pooled together in this bucket, but I want to dive into each and have you explain to listeners what those are, so that we can kind of sort this out in everyone's heads. So first, there's the pot from which schools can make payments directly to their student athletes. So can you talk about that bucket first?
Yes. So you first have to kind of start with like this date, and let's talk about it from the House settlement. And the House settlement was a settlement of the Power Five conferences, including the Pac-12, with Plaintiffs' Council, which was that was a class action, and it basically agreed on a new set of rules and ways that institutions and the member institutions of the NCAA could interact with student athletes for their name, image, and likeness. And so that settlement was approved on June 8th, 2025 by Judge Wilkin. And after that date, schools were, and the NCAA updated their rule book. I think they changed it from like 600 or 700 pages to 400 pages, the NCAA manual. And since that date, schools can now pay directly student athletes for their NIL rights. This is what we call as revenue sharing payments or revenue sharing contracts. And the House settlement set out basically what you're able to, the cap of what you can pay. And so for this year, and it goes up over every 3 years, a school can pay up to $20.5 million to their athletes. And in theory, a school can pay $20.5 million to one athlete, or the school can pay $20.5 million spread around all 400 athletes, depending on what they want to do. And this could be at varying ranges of amounts per sport. And also, the agreements with the student athletes can be different type of terms. So you can have different termination terms and different rights that you've obtained. You can get promotional of the school rights, or you can get more promotional of sponsors of the schools. And so each agreement in what they're paying for the school are different. But this is now what we call as the rev share payments that people are accustomed to. And so when a high school athlete is going to college, colleges can now tell the athlete if they're going to provide them a rev share payment, or, which we'll get to in a sec, scholarship, or how is that going to look. But now this is a component of recruiting and something that is allowable under the NCAA rules.
Yeah, I mean, and that is no small chunk of change. When you're talking about even the portion of that relative to some of the big schools' athletics budgets, that's huge. But then when you talk about small schools, I mean, that's a big number for people to meet.
Yeah, and I guess one point of clarification is that is you can pay up to that amount, but you do not have to pay that entire amount.
Right.
So if you are a college or university that has opted into the House settlement, which many have, you can pay 7 million. You can pay 5 million. And so it's just saying that is the maximum you can pay for college. But regardless, this is new money that the college or university would have to raise and obtain that has not, that's just new, and it's a substantial amount of money. So in that regards, everyone is going to have their own difference. And one thing I'll also flag for those that are kind of curious, like, okay, well, if you don't have football, then how does that work? Well, you still are capped up to 20.5 million. So for a school like Gonzaga, for instance, they have now more money for basketball, women's basketball, and their other sports, where a lot of the schools, especially the football schools, that's where a lot of their rev share money is being allocated to. So you're going to see different schools maybe putting more money into certain sports than others, and based upon the new setup, they are absolutely allowed to, and you may see a different kind of regime change in some of the traditional sports that you'd know as, let's say, Alabama's very good at that sport. That may change into maybe Fordham or some other school that decides they want to be the best at cross-country running. It's going to be interesting to see how everyone reacts.
Yeah, that is an interesting detail in that. So then, okay, second, so we talked about rev share. Second, we hear about the collectives. What are those? Well, let's start there. Let's start with what they are.
Yeah, so collectives, I think it was deemed by the media, but in part because when everything went into effect on July 1st, 2021, basically donors came together collectively, and they create an LLC or a nonprofit or something where the focus of that organization is meant to help the school that they care about and their student athletes monetize off their NIL. And so collectives were born. And so why that name is a bit misleading is because they're actually just LLCs or businesses, but they are set up with a focus of only one school in mind, which makes them in the media's eyes and how people refer them as a collective. But that there's no different there's no different registration for being called a collective. It's just that's how it's deemed by the media and then so on. So I think that's one piece of what a collective is. That hopefully that people can understand that there's now a difference. And one other thing, a lot of these collectives, the types of deals that they would do are very kind of in some ways circular, where money would come in to back to pay the athletes to promote the team. And so there would be true business situations, but a lot of it is based so much on focused on paying the athlete to participate so the athlete gets paid, but it's a lot less like a consumer good that someone's trying to just promote and make as much money as possible for profit. So like the goal of the business itself was to help create NIL opportunities for athletes, not so much as to potentially make a profit.
Okay. So then I think that leads us into a third bucket, which are third party agreements, which might be more of what people think of as a traditional product sponsorship or something along those lines, if I'm not mistaken. So now let's talk about those, and you can explain it better than I can.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, if you have a company, whether it's like a title company doing real estate, doing real estate deals, or you have a car dealership, or you're Nike or Adidas, you now can enter into an agreement with a student athlete and have them promote your product, and connect with your consumers, and that has never existed until these athletes would have become professional, which was a lot of revenue and opportunities that these student athletes weren't receiving. So now a student athlete can get rev share money. They can get money from collectives and getting paid through the collectives. But also just if they want a brand and sponsorship, they have a lot of engagement on social media. We found that even an athlete that doesn't play, who's a backup. I was a center. So let's say a backup center who has a mohawk that people love when he takes off his helmet. That itself could be an opportunity for a brand deal that would be a way to monetize and make money off your name, image, and likeness that wasn't ever there until over the last 4.5 years. So those are what some would call true NIL. And that is really where a lot of the focus is, and really I think a lot of the intent was when NIL went into effect was for student athletes to be able to monetize off of these third-party agreements in a way to really maximize off their athletic reputation and NIL while they're in school.
Yeah, one of my favorite stories about this, and I don't know if he still has this agreement, but people may remember the gymnast from the Olympics, Fred Richard.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was a collegiate athlete, I think at Michigan, he signed a deal with Flips, those like chocolate covered pretzel snacks.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, you've got a gymnast that people love and like and follow on social media, leveraging that with a snack brand called Flips. I just thought it was
Perfect.
It was clever and perfect, and good for him. So I want to talk about scholarships, which are still a piece of this puzzle, even with the actual direct payment opportunities. But before we do, can you tell us what the College Sports Commission, or the Collegiate Sports Commission, I may have even butchered that right there, but the CSC, what that is and what its role in this is?
Yeah, so the College Sports Commission, and please do not get it confused with the College Sports Commission created by Donald Trump recently.
Excellent clarification. Thank you.
Funny enough, the Big Ten General Counsel at a meeting joked that they're not great at naming names, and so but that's the name of the new enforcement arm for NIL of the NCAA. It's not really affiliated with the NCAA. It's, I think, controlled by or funded by the Power Four conferences, which is the ACC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the SEC. And so that is basically an enforcement arm to enforce the terms of the House settlement that was approved by the federal court as fair and reasonable. And what they're doing is looking at deals and determining if it's is it for a valid business purpose. And you may be saying, what's that mean? It's on their website. So if you're curious right now and you're listening to this podcast and you're at a computer or on your phone, just go College Sports Commission, and there's a website that explains all of this very well on there. And then they're also looking at, is it within the range of compensation? And so effectively what's happening is if you have a deal with a collective or an LLC or whatever you want to deem it, or a third party agreement, this student athlete before signing, or ideally before signing and being obligated, will submit this deal through the program called NIL Go, and they have access to that. And the NIL Go and the College Sports Commission and Deloitte will evaluate this. Is it for a valid business purpose? Is it within the range of compensation? And then after evaluation, we'll say whether it's approved, needs more information, rejected, or that's it. And what we're finding is if it's rejected, and this is for since anyone may be going through this process, the student athlete has an opportunity to renegotiate the agreement to fix any of the issues that the CSE has identified, whether it's not within the range of compensation or not for a valid business purpose, and you can resubmit it. And the idea is to kind of, as I noted earlier in the call, that the NCAA and its member institutions are trying to curtail pay to play, which is disguising NIL compensation in terms of going to a school to play rather than like this true NIL. And so that's what this program is meant to enforce and do. And it's in the very early stages. I think it's been operating since as soon as the judge approved. But that is what the CSE is. And it turns out if you Google CSE, there's a lot of other CSE things. But this is what for college sports it is. So hopefully that helps give some context.
Yeah, that is helpful, I think, because I know I get just in casual conversation with friends and colleagues who are also college sports fans. You know, this comes up a lot. Is how do they? What's the oversight? How do they stick to the rules in this? It's complicated. So we wish them luck in that.
Yeah. Let me add. One thing people are like, well, what happens if you just proceed on? You don't submit it to the CSC and you just start doing deals. And it's basically do those things at your own risk. It's been very clear from the CSC's point of view that they're going to come in with a very heavy hand on their first enforcement action. And the biggest concern with any NIL deal, the thing that you worry the most if you're a business or those engaging with a student athlete or a student athlete engaging with a business, is making sure that you are eligible to play your sport. And so the CSE has the ability to make people get suspended from a game or for a season or for even make them ineligible from competing in collegiate sports. So they have that ability to do so. To date, we have not seen any enforcement actions yet, but I think there is that is the biggest concern and why everyone is trying to, as they should, comply with the NIL Go and the CSC guidelines. But we're really going to see, and there's been a lot of lawsuits in this industry that has paved the path to new things that have happened. And so we don't know if that's going to get challenged or anything like that. But this is what we know now, is that this is the system. This is what you need to do. And if something, and we will see how they react to their first enforcement action and whether that sticks. So, but that gives some context.
Yeah, that's helpful. Just really quickly, I want to get to some of the topics back on this whole issue, but I do feel like it's worth a slight digression, or it's not really a digression, but a slight bit of conversation around scholarships, because that has traditionally been, the package that you get offered. for your participation. And my understanding is there's a shift in this too as part of this whole, again, puzzle, to use that analogy. But is that accurate? And can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so there is, rather than have scholarship limits of what you're able to do, now there's roster limits per school, and they've allowed, if you've now want more scholarships for a specific sport, and they've set out the numeric that you're allowed per sport, that actually eats into your $20.5 million house settlement cap. And so what we're seeing is actually schools, it's now a roster limit set up, but everyone, they are still giving out scholarships. Some schools are saying, I'm going to give more scholarships, even though that reduces my 20.5 million I can spend. And so, but if I'm a student athlete, it's just, am I getting a scholarship or am I not getting a scholarship at this point, or a partial scholarship? But scholarships still exist. So the four ways that a student athlete can get paid is through a scholarship, third-party agreements, these collective agreements, and also rev share. But scholarships still around, but internally for the school, there's a different kind of allocation and setup. And I suspect each year, you may see more scholarships for a certain sport versus less, but that will be a little bit different and something to monitor as time goes on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So let's talk about the scope of this. I saw a presentation you did and was sort of awestruck by the numbers. So talk to our listeners about what kind of dollars are we talking, and to the extent you might be able to do this, how many athletes are likely to benefit from this? Is that something we can predict?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So you first, just to give our wonderful audience, our robust audience listening, this industry, when it first went into effect, it was estimated to be about $700 million of new money being paid to student athletes, exchanging hands. Then as that has increased this year, the estimate is $2.3 billion of NIL money and payments being made, whether it's rev share and all the pieces that we've outlined. And so we're seeing a lot of money that's getting paid to a lot of different sports, but you're seeing football is getting a lion's share. This is publicly available. I mean, some institutions have said that they're going to allocate 85% to football and 10% to men's basketball. And so, we're talking about a student athlete who's 18 years old, may get paid $1 million for 1 year to be at an institution and for them to use their name, image, and likeness. And we're talking about a volleyball team that could end up getting, or a player may get $20,000, or a women's basketball. But I think in each, as I said, each school will have to make determinations on what they're willing to pay and whatnot. But what we're seeing now is that, at least for rev share, dollars are being spent towards the profit sports, which is sports that are creating a profit for the institution, which is football, men's basketball, and women's basketball generally. And then the rest of the sports may not get rev share, or may find other opportunities through other kind of sponsorship deals. But we're talking, it's just fascinating to see some of these athletes who, I played with them. I played with a lot of athletes at Oregon. That's a little giveaway, but the fact that they have these opportunities in college at a time that they typically wouldn't is incredible. But you're talking about 7-figure potential deals, or 5-figure deals.
Yeah, and I think I was going to ask you this, but I won't. I'll just make the comment, and we can let everyone stew on it themselves. But I think this is why a lot of people ask the question of what this means for those the other sports. I was a rower. I don't see a lot of people lining up to give big NIL money to rowing. But I think it'll be very interesting to see what this means overall and in individual schools for some of those other sports: swimming, gymnastics, track and field, tennis, etc. So we don't need to dive into that. I'm not going to put you on the spot to predict or opine, but I think that's an interesting conversation a lot of people are having and anxious to see.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, one of the things you talked about the profit sports, and you talked about the lion's share of the money going to football, a men's sport, basketball, men's basketball, maybe a little bit to women's basketball as an emerging profit sport. Um, and another thing that comes up in conversation a lot is Title IX considerations. What's the interplay there? Do we know? Is that an emerging body of law or something you expect to be on the table a little more?
Yeah, Title IX is well, it's a fascinating area of law that is incredibly dynamic. It's also dependent in some ways. The law itself isn't dependent on the administration, but the enforcement of it is. So to kind of scale back, in our past administration, it was a robust Office of Civil Rights that was very involved in Title IX and reshaping some of the regulations there. Since then, since the Trump administration has come in, they have done away with a lot of that. The Department of Education is much smaller than it was. And so in terms of also like the enforcement of Title IX regs, it's dynamic in that regard. First off, just for the audience, Title IX was enacted in 1972 to prohibiting the discrimination based on sex in any education programs or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So every institution receives federal financial assistance, meaning every institution is subject to Title IX. You can't just defend yourself. There may be some high schools that don't, but generally everyone is subject to Title IX. So what does that mean from a NIL perspective? I will say back in 1972, the intent of the Title IX was not did not contemplate student athletes getting paid and NIL. And so one of the open questions on Title IX is how does it apply to NIL payments? We know how it applies to scholarships. We know how it applies to assistance and promotional rights. But the idea of schools paying student athletes, is that subject to Title IX? Is it subject to something else? And that has been a gray area. It's just been a gray area. The past administration came out with basically a rule sheet that wasn't verified or gone through the proper rule channels, but just came out with something of their thoughts that it does apply to Title IX. It was quickly rescinded by the Trump administration. So we are left now with are the payments by institutions to student athletes subject to Title IX? And if the answer is yes, in what capacity? Is it paying the rev share money equally? Is it paying the same amount of women's athletes versus male athletes? Is in terms of how they're using their NIL? I think there's a lot of open questions on this, but the short answer is that no one really knows until the courts get involved in this. And there's some cases that are floating around, but it's going to be something that we're going to have to wait and see and how it applies. And it likely will get challenged, and we'll just be in limbo on this for a while. But it's just an open-ended question that, unfortunately, as a lawyer, I have to say I just don't have an answer at this time.
Yeah, that's a great lawyer answer. I appreciate that. But that actually brings up one of the final things I kind of wanted to just touch on is, this all happened really fast, and now we've got lawyers and accountants and compliance officers and school officials and administrators. And I was an administrator at a university for a while. This is a lot of work. And so it feels like there's now this niche industry where agents and agencies are now they have their, whole new departments targeting this. And how is that growing up? And is there, just talk a little bit from your perspective as a service provider in this space, what that's been like from a kind of, new industry popping up.
It's wild. I'll be honest, right? Since I've been in this thing since 2019, before this thing was really a thing, I've seen ideas and thoughts. I've seen businesses come and go. And some things, people have great ideas on how to provide services, but it's just too early, and then it just goes away. One thing I'll flag is that I've seen a lot of cuts happen at college institutions recently. I think even Oklahoma and USC have cut a lot of staff. I suspect a lot of these institutions, and I know they are, they're farming out some of this work that we're talking about, the third party contractors. In part, I anticipate just to get their, get it going and figure out and assess and figure out what to do next. There's just new budgets and new ways of doing things. I mean, educational institutions are generally in the like their mission is to educate and support their students, not so much on paying NIL. And so some of this is a bit foreign and different than institutions have done, and agencies are evolving very rapidly. It's funny, when this industry first started, it was just agents who would take on a couple of college athletes on their pro athlete group. And now you're seeing agencies literally create a whole division of college and trying to grab as many as possible for leverage purposes, right? Because the more athletes they have, the more they can guide them to certain schools or places that they want. So I mean, it's growing. I think a lot of people have a lot of great ideas, but sometimes it's not the right time. And uh, it's just we're really in like the second inning. I think it was like last year where I felt like we're in the first inning. Well, now we're in the second inning, and there's just a lot to be done to see what happens. Like, will a federal bill get passed that preempts all state law? Will state laws continue to emerge? Will you start seeing the CSC get more intense in its enforcement of these agreements? Will everyone start falling in line, and will member institutions stop suing the NCAA or each other? I mean, currently there's a lawsuit of Wisconsin suing Miami because of tampering and poaching a Wisconsin player to go to Miami. So, I mean, we're just like, there's so much going on, but there's also, that means there's rife with opportunity because of new systems and softwares and a lot of money entering to the market. So it's just there's a lot of things going on.
Yeah, I mean it's billions to the athletes this year, as you mentioned, and then a whole lot goes into just facilitating and administering those billions. So it's I think it is probably a very wild ride for you and others who are involved. It's going to be a wild ride for some time, I think. And I appreciate you taking the time to walk our listeners through, and me through, some of this background. It's fascinating as a sports fan, as a former collegiate athlete, again, to just see this again, seismic shift. It's people have a lot of questions, and I appreciate the fact that you and your colleagues at Miller Nash and other firms in the area are digging in and trying to figure it all out. So you sort of alluded to it, but I got to ask before we go. Some people are going to probably recognize your name, but do you want to say who you're rooting for this fall?
I think so. I listen. I'm a fan of sports. I'm a fan of watching, people and athletes that dedicate their whole life to the sport to try to be the best at it and compete with other people doing the same exact thing. But yeah, I'm a former Oregon Duck football player. My last year was when we lost to Auburn in the national championship. So please do not call me and talk to me about if Michael Dyer's arm is down or not. His arm was down, but that's not how it got called. So I'm rooting for my Ducks, but I got to tell you, I'm a fan of all sports. I'm a fan. I've had best friends that played for the Beavers. In fact, my two high school teammates, Ryan Katz and Cam Collins, both played for
Sure.
the Beavers. So anyway, I'm a big fan, but should be an incredible run this year. And ratings for all sports are off the charts. Softball, women's basketball, and football and men's basketball are still increasing their ratings across the board. So I think there's a lot of really good signs that this industry is not just strong, but like growing at an immense speed, where all this like justification of new business and opportunities make a lot of sense. So I'm glad that your listeners are here and listening to me gab, but I really appreciate the opportunity to being on this podcast.
Yeah, no, thank you for joining us. I know people will have found this interesting, and probably it'll result, no doubt, in some rabbit holing on the internet to try to learn a little more. So Max Forer of Miller Nash, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in. The Oregon Business Matters podcast is a production of Oregon Business and Industry, and episodes can be found on all of our top podcast platforms. For more information about OBI and the work we do to advocate for Oregon's business community, please visit OregonBusinessIndustry.com. Thank you so much.